Hello, welcome to the Wiggin Sessions. I'm Addison Wiggin, your host. This is part 36 of surviving and thriving during the global pandemic. We're now in 2021. Seems like longer than a year, but here we are. Today's guest is Mark Skousen, good friend of mine, and he's had an illustrious career, which I'd like to highlight. Mark is the Presidential Fellow at Chapman University. He has been the longtime editor of Forecasts and Strategies, newsletter for individual investors. He's author of over 25 books, many of them bestsellers, and we're going to talk about one today in particular. And I just read this in your bio, Mark. You are the winner of the inaugural Triple Crown in economics, which I find interesting. It's awarding you for your work in economic theory, history, and education. You've been a professor many prestigious universities for some time. You can talk a little bit about that. And then also I want to, we'll talk more towards the end of the conversation about Freedom Fest. You've moved it to South Dakota. So it's an interesting story behind all of that. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, I just want to welcome you, Mark. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Addison. I'm out here in California, and I see you're in sunny Maryland.
Yeah, sunny Maryland, which is a rare, especially this time of year. I want to get into one project. This is on the economic theory front of things. For a long time, you've been lobbying outfits like the Bureau of Labor Statistics to recalculate the way that we measure growth in the economy. Right now, the most commonly used numerator is gross domestic product, but you argue for something you call gross output. Could you do a couple things? One, explain what you find not sufficient with gross domestic product, what gross output does more effectively, and how I know that you had a hearing, I think it was in early January of this year, that made some progress. So maybe fill us in on what's going on with your efforts to recalculate how the economy is measured, and maybe put that in context of these lockdowns that we're talking about. The economy has been effectively shut down, and it's going to be a while before we open back up.
Yeah, Addison, I've always had some misgivings about gross GDP as the measure of the economy, and perhaps that's the best way to start. What's missing from GDP? And of course, the traditional view, well, the black market, household activity, that sort of thing. But I look at it a little bit more differently. I see GDP as a legitimate statistic, by the way, especially when you measure it from quarter to quarter and from year to year. I think it is a pretty good measure of our standard of living, measuring it from country to country and that sort of thing. But what bothers me is that it implies that consumer spending is the beginning and end of all personal behavior and government behavior and so forth. If you look at GDPs, about 2/3 of GDP is consumer spending. So based on that, you get the media constantly saying consumer spending is the key factor to economic growth. And if the consumer doesn't spend, we're in big trouble and so forth. And it's almost an anti-savings mentality that we need to use our credit cards more and save less. And there's lots of statements to that effect. I mean, when there was a tax cut, do you spend the tax cut or do you save it and put it in a bank? Well, horror of horrors, you would save this money and put it into a bank or invest it in the stock market. No, you have to go out and buy a car. You have to go out and spend it on entertainment and so forth. And I find this very destructive in terms of personal behavior. We're always encouraging people to save more. to invest their savings and to live within their means, not overuse their credit cards. So you have this struggle between the consumer type of view of the economy and the supply side of it. Well, it turns out that the problem with GDP is that it leaves out the supply chain. All the goods and services that are produced in the long chain of production processes is completely left out of GDP. So GDP just measures final output only. So it measures the hat, the glasses, the shirt that I'm wearing, the cell phones that we use, because those are usable finished products. What it doesn't include is all the stages of production at the resource stage, the production stage, the wholesale stage, leaves out all of those steps. And when you add those together, the supply chain turns out to be more than GDP itself, because there's lots of stages of production before you reach final output. So I came up with the idea, well, let's measure that and call it gross output. And I did this in a book that, in fact, I have a copy of it right here. This is kind of my academic book, The Structure of Production. Wrote it in 1990, published by New York University Press. And in it, I made the case, well, we need not just the bottom line GDP statistic, but we need a top line that measures spending at all stages of production. So I call gross output the top line in national income accounting. And, if you watch CNBC on TV, they constantly talk about top line and bottom line whenever there's an earnings report. So top line is sales, bottom line is profit. So we need the same thing in economics. So we've been missing this. I've suggested that economists need to catch up with the accounting and the finance of the past, and they finally have. So in April of 2014, after frequent encouragement, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, you said Bureau of Labor Statistics, they actually do the CPI and stuff like that, but the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the BEA, all part of the Commerce Department, they are the ones who put out quarterly GDP statistics. And so now since April of 2014, they've also released the gross output statistic. So you now have a complete measure of top line and bottom line accounting, and it's quite revealing. First of all, it shows that business spending is actually almost twice as much as consumer spending. So if you look at GO, gross output, total spending in the economy, and not just final spending, you find that consumer spending is about 1/3. It's important, but it's only 1/3 of total spending. Government's business spending is over 60%. So now you suddenly realize business spending is really important in the economy. Business investing, the goods in process, the supply chain, all of that is really what drives the economy. And if you look at the leading indicators, almost all the leading indicators are in the intermediate side of the production process on the supply side. So this gets us back to reality that what really drives an economy is entrepreneurship, savings, investment, innovation, technology, and that's all on the supply side. It's a little bit of an anti-Keynesian attitude that maybe we need to be saving more, not less. So it takes you in a very different direction as far as where the economy is going.